principles released by the head of public service suspending non-essential foreign travel for top civil servants.
United Nations Security Council approves Kenya's mission to lead a multinational security force in Haiti for a year, with a review after 9 months to help contain gang violence.
Kakamaga's Bukungu Stadium will host part of the AFCON 2027 matches. Sports CS Sababu Namwamba farms as he responds to complaints by governors from the Western region on being left out.
Well, the game is coming home. How about that? Bukungu Stadium is where AFCON will be played, at least one of the stadiums there. That's some good news to start the day with.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
I remember yesterday, trying to have both.
We were not very happy with that. Yes, initially I said it's only Nairobi and Eldoret.
Oh, yes.
We were wondering how can the game just come so close and not get home. Well, good morning and welcome to this edition of Morning Cafe. My name is Freddy Ndimuli.
And I'm Flora Limuki, and of course on the other side we'll be having that conversation concerning gender-based violence. And today we focus on men, mostly because these conversations have been going on, but it seems like there's so much focus given on the female gender, and even when men are going through these are issues that are not addressed. Therefore, that conversation is what we'll be discussing at around 8 a.m. today. That also forms the basis of a question today, and we ask you, what do you think the society can do to better address and support male victims of gender-based violence? What do you think the society can do to better address and support male victims of gender-based violence? At TV47 News on X, at TV47 Kenya on Facebook. The hashtag is Morning Cafe.
I'm usually Stanley Nyeringita, and obviously we definitely will be meeting at around 9 a.m. all the way to 10 a.m. just to update you on what is happening in different parts of the world and basically the whole county, county diary and also the international diary. So definitely talk to us on our social media platforms. You can always chime in and be part of us. But now, Fred, to the big story.
Yes, to our top story now. The head of public service, Felix Koskei, has suspended non-essential foreign travel for top civil servants with immediate effect. In a circular issued yesterday, Koskei said foreign travel for the following categories for Government of Kenya officials is suspended. That is, benchmarking and study visits, trainings and related capacity building initiatives, research, academic meetings and symposia, conferences and meetings of general participation, side events, showcase events and exhibitions, and caucus and association meetings and events. The circular further limited the number of people traveling along with government officials. For example, delegations accompanying the President, the First Lady, the Deputy President, and the Prime Cabinet Secretary shall strictly be approved for officials playing a direct role in the scheduled activities and program of the principals. And in that regard, the Ministry of Foreign and Diaspora Affairs has been directed to rationalize the number of personnel accompanying each of the principals and reduce the same by 50%. Let's now get the day's diary before we take a look at the dailies.
Right, and on today's diary, quite a number of things actually happening in the National Assembly and obviously also in the Bomas of Kenya. Just to update you, the whole bipartisan talks and in the National Dialogue Committee, what to expect this particular morning. Well, first of all, in our day's diary, the 3rd of October, members of the National Assembly as well as key stakeholders in the Universal Health Coverage and Constituency Development Fund are set to meet today to champion for partnership between the UHC and also CDF. We'll be following up on that just to update you on that. Well, from that, the 3rd Kenya Copyright Board will today be hosting an exchange forum which will actually be the third exchange forum on copyright and intellectual property. The whole theme of this particular forum is demystifying copyright and IP laws and also matters policies. And that particular that I was telling you, various political parties from both the Kenya Kwanza coalition as well as the Azimio la Umoja coalition party is set to present their views today before the National Dialogue Committee, co-chaired by Wiper leader Kalonzo Musyoka and also Majority Leader Kimani Ichung'wah, Majority Leader in the National Assembly. Just to update you also on today in history, basically, what happened back then. So back in actually last year, at least 20 people were killed and 36 others were wounded in the central Somali town of Beledweyne, a day like today. And in 2015, US airstrikes destroyed a trauma hospital in Kunduz, Afghanistan, killing 42 people. Remember, we'll be updating this diary from around 9 a.m. So stick around for that. You can get in today's dailies.
Yes, just before we get to the dailies, today we're going to be having a very interesting discussion as from 6:30 on green manufacturing. Do stand by for that. I know it is one of those conversations, almost like climate change and climate action. So there'll be a lot of learning to do. So
conversations that we need to have.
Yes,
but again,
but we rarely do.
Yes.
And actually, speaking of rarely do, Flora, today is National Boyfriend's Day.
Oh, is it?
Yes.
Are you saying boyfriends are a reality?
Well, the whole discussion of having, boyfriends out here and saying that I celebrate you.
Okay.
And I see ati kumnunulia tu happy socks and that's all.
But I celebrate you, my boy, if you are somewhere out there, kama umejiapisha.
Interesting. Okay, let's take a look at the dailies now, and we start off with the Standard this morning. The big headline on the Standard: save us from salary shame. Civil servants cry for help. The Public Service Commission, in a memorandum to the National Dialogue team, has said public servants can no longer make ends meet. In some instances, up to half the employees take home less than a third of their pay. That story is on page 2 of the Standard. And it's on the rising cost of living. The PSC chair, Ambassador Anthony Mushiri, says the rising cost of living has impacted negatively on public officers, which has resulted in low morale, poor performance, and poor social welfare of officers, some of whom are undergoing depression. They're recommending a review of taxation regime, or increase in salaries, or exempt those servicing mortgages from similar levies or taxes. They're also recommending a staggered implementation of the housing levy, or make it a percentage of the basic pay, not the gross. They're also recommending a number of levies and VAT imposed on fuel to be reviewed to reduce price of fuel, which will make cost of living come down. These are the discussions we've been having all along. Now, the Public Service Commission has told that National Dialogue Committee the same. A stark reality: out of 79,253 public officers, about 17,000 of them earn less than a third of their salaries. Out of 31,000 prison officers, 13,000 earn less than a third of their salaries. Out of 106,000 disciplined officers, 51,000 earn less than a third of their salaries. And that's a big story on the front page of the Standard. Other highlights given prominence on the front page today: Gachagwa's woes scaling Mount Kenya, ride to becoming regional kingpin is proving tougher or rougher than the DP thought. He's not only fighting political wars, but his economic blueprint for the region is facing turbulence. The story is on page 6. Elsewhere, Mandago to face 202 witnesses. The Uasin Gishu senator and his co-accused will have to defend himself against accusations of a botched scholarship deal. Lined up to testify are parents and students whose dreams for higher education were crushed. Stories on page 8. Now, on the top strip of the Standard this morning, governors seek cover against impeachments. Story covered on pages 10 and 11. On the international scene, US Speaker faces ouster of a bill. That's on page 27. A highlight there of the Financial Standard, and on the front page of the Financial Standard: cost of living, Ruto advisors in a storm. After starting off with so much hope, the Kenya Kwanza government now seems to be floundering in the dark as prices spin out of control, with the bottom end of the pyramid disproportionately feeling the weight. Stories on page 4 to 5 of the Financial Standard. And in sports, will Man United stand and be counted?
We must
Will
be
it?
seen. We must be seen.
Will they?
We must be seen.
Are they able to?
We must be seen.
Do they have the capacity? Many questions can be asked there. On the back page of the Standard, yes, that story about Man United.
Arsenal won 4-0 over the weekend.
No, that is still news.
Well, they're talking about I think this is what? The Champions League. Yeah, okay.
And the back page is even interesting.
Champions League games today, and the back pages: Union Berlin versus Braga at 7:45, Salzburg versus Real Sociedad, Man United versus Galatasaray. Will they stand to be counted? Will they? That's the question. Copenhagen versus Bayern Munich, Lens versus Arsenal, PSV Eindhoven versus Sevilla, Napoli versus Real Madrid. Interesting game there. And finally, Inter Milan versus Benfica at 10 p.m. That's the Champions League itinerary this Tuesday.
This writer here seems like an Arsenal fan. It's time to stand up and fight like real men.
Will they stand up to be counted?
All the best, Stanley. Well, let's have a look at the Daily Nation.
We'll be talking about pain tomorrow morning.
Well, and on the Daily Nation this morning, the top headline there: travel, Ruto stops party for joyriders. Cost cutting. They were used to traveling first class, staying in swanky hotels and getting generous allowances for their shopping. And many state officer or civil servant would often fight to be part of a delegation heading out of the country. But all this will now come to an end after President William Ruto issued a new directive suspending non-essential travel while limiting delegation sizes, including for the presidency, and trimming travel budgets. Will the president succeed this time round? That's an interesting piece there on page 6 and 7 of the Daily Nation. And just highlight is that the new guidelines set the cumulative number of days of the officials can be out of the country at 7 days per trip, 15 days per quarter, that is in 3 months, and 45 days per year. That the circular states that where a cabinet secretary is to be accompanied, at least one of the delegates must be a technical officer specialized in the subject matter, with no security or personal assistant or logistics officers allowed, except well exempted. Well, that's an interesting read there on page 6 and 7 of the Daily Nation, and I'm wondering, is that directive starting now? Because I believe some of them have already traveled for 45 days as per now.
Well, I think it takes effect from now,
Yeah.
so it won't affect those who have already exhausted the days.
Yeah.
But I think the most interesting is cutting the president's travel entourage by 50%.
Oh, yeah.
Because I think there's so many hangers-on who just ride.
Yeah.
They know the president is going somewhere, and they just show up at the taxpayer's expense.
Yes.
And they may not necessarily be of any necessity for
Yes.
that trip.
Absolutely. It will be interesting to see if that actually is followed. But away from that, review impeachment law, Waiguru urges after winning another term as a COG boss. That story is on page 4 and 5 of the Daily Nation, even as some 2 governors face impeachment threats from the MCAs. And some matters, civil servants here, 42 billion shillings staff pensions held up by employers, say regulator. This is the 176 is the number of registered pension schemes that are licensed to collect retirement dues from Kenyans. And the amount of pension cash that employers are deducting from employees but not remitting to the scheme has ballooned to 41.8 billion shillings, spelling doom for thousands of workers who face life in retirement without the cash. The Retirement Benefits Authority, RBA, says that most of these employers are quasi-government institutions, mainly public universities, and by September 2020, the outstanding amount stood at 35 billion shillings, hence that increase of more than 6 billion shillings there. And Bomas talks in limbo as KK Azimio skip hearing. That is on the very lower strip of the Daily Nation this morning. The ruling Kenya Kwanza and opposition Azimio la Umoja representatives fail to make their presentations at Bomas as the rival factions played out a game of wait and see with each other. That story is on page 7 of the Daily Nation this morning. And in courts, 200 witnesses lined up against Mandago. The state has lined up 200 witnesses to testify against Uasin Gishu Senator Jackson Mandago, the 1.1 billion controversial Finland and Canada education program saga. That story is on page 10 of the Daily Nation. And more than 65% of land injustice cases in the country are from the coast region, with Kilifi County accounting for over 2,000 reported to the National Lands Commission. And some matters, sports there. Real Madrid boss was sacked by Napoli in 2019, less than an hour after he helped the team reach the Champions League knockout stages with 4-0 thrashing of Genk. And that story there covered on page 39 of the Daily Nation. And on the back page of the Daily Nation this morning, NLC report, pretty much what we've seen there. NLC report shows coast region has most land injustice cases in Kenya, and employers there owe pension schemes 42 billion shillings, says RBA. And away from that, the PS calls for more health research as nuclear cause unveiled. That is what's making headlines on the Daily Nation this morning.
Right, real quick, we can take a look at Money Matters on Business Daily. On the top, the big story actually on Business Daily is Matters. Fuel usage dips to 5-year low as Kenyans keep cars at home. It goes on to say petrol consumption falls 5% to 1.01 billion litres, and drop likely to slow down economic activity and also the GDP. Other stories making it to Business Daily on the right side there, that ticker. MPs want CA, the Communications Authority, to disable WorldCoin internet link. So basically the members of parliament have asked the Communication Authority of Kenya to disable the virtual platforms of WorldCoin pending the review of the regulatory framework for virtual assets. Well, that is on page 4. And in Matters companies, digital lenders top loans below 1,000 Kenyan shillings on CBK rule. And just below it, in Matters markets, bond trading hits 2-year high in returns race. On the bottom strip, Trigger Foods turns tables on IT firm in liquidation claim. Well, finally, up there on the top strip, it's an op-ed, an opinion editorial there. Anytime I hear about women fighting for their rights, it worries me. For in fights, there are winners and losers. That's according to Mike Eldon. You can get that on page 9. While on the Fullerton Life, rich Kenyans turn spare rooms into home theatres on page 19. That is on Business Daily this morning.
Tuangazie gazeti la Taifa Leo Jumanne hii. Habari kuu pale kanisa la mhepa Ruto. Ukosoaji Kimani Ichung'wah awafokea wakuu wa kanisa akiwemo Ole Sapit aliyekuwa kati ya marafiki wa karibu wa rais wakati wa kutangazwa mshindi wa kura mwaka jana. Maaskofu wa hadhi Ole Sapit wa ACK na Muheria wa Katoliki waibuka kuwa wembe mkali kwa Kenya Kwanza. Hii ndio habari kuu, habari kamili kwenye ukurasa wa pili wa Taifa Leo. Vidokezo vingine pale juu kwenye ukurasa wa mbele wa Taifa Leo, Waiguru ahifadhi kiti Sakaja nje. Adumisha nafasi ya kinara wa magavana huku Sakaja akipoteza chake. Habari kamili kwenye ukurasa wa pili. Kwingineko, Kenya Kwanza Azimio wakataa wito Bomas. Wawakilishi wa mirengo miwili wakosa kufika mbele ya kamati. Interesting. ukurasa wa 3. Pale chini kuna ratiba ya UEFA, Europa na Conference League. Wanaopenda spoti mweza kuangalia pale chini mambo kadha wa kadha. Je, Man U itaweza kusimama au kustahimili?
We must be seen.
Tutakuwa hapa kesho kuangalia matokeo na hizo ndizo habari zilizopewa kipaumbele kwenye ukurasa wa mbele wa Taifa Leo hii leo.
Naam, na tuangazie gazeti la Star. The Star this morning, the headline there, hiring IEBC chiefs, new Raila Ruto political war. The sharp difference in opinions already playing out before the bipartisan commitment. And that is a story that is covered on page 4 to 5 of the Star this morning. And there's an interesting picture here on the Star. Officers well-trained, IG tells critics ahead of the Haiti mission. That is as far as the officers were to be deployed to Haiti to help in fighting in Haiti come January, around 1,000 of them in preparations there. And experts test drug that makes blood deadly to mosquitoes. That is as far as malaria control is concerned in the country. And simple innovations to save millions of mothers' babies. And opened there on page 14 and 15 of the Star this morning. And on the top strip of the Star this morning, composer, player of KBC Morning Kivoti tune now beggar on streets. Sad story there on page 10 of the Star this morning.
Right, and finally, before we cross the borders, now to People Daily. People Daily says...
Oh, People Daily is back.
Well, yeah. Stay home and work, civil servants told. So basically, that's the big story on People Daily. Tough rules halt travel gravy train. With government struggling to remain afloat, the presidency has unveiled a raft of new measures to curb foreign trips, cutting back number of visits and officials who can attend meetings. More on that is on page 4. And there's a quote there by, there's a quote there, the Constitution demands a prudent and responsible utilization of public money, a principle that remains the guiding anchor of the government fiscal consolidation policy. And in matters of devolution, Waiguru re-elected COG chair. County bosses want new rules on how to impeach them. Okay. And it is holiday for Faith. Holiday time for Faith after great run. On page 31, she took to her socials saying that Christmas ianze mapema for her. Wacha yeye atulie. On the top strip of People Daily, they take you back to Turkana and tell you, down the drain, how Turkana lost 800 million Kenyan shillings in Ghost House. Contractors were paid hefty sums, but none has ever completed residence. That is on People Daily. Hopefully we'll get the caricature for Stanu's work on...
oh yeah, it's been a while.
Been a while.
Tuvuke border, let's go to Uganda now. And in Uganda, on the Daily Monitor this morning, the big headline in Kampala, tour operators sucked into UWA gorilla scam. They've been talking about this gorilla scam for a while now. Internal investigations carried out between June and August have shown that a number of tour operators connived with officials at the agency charged with the country's wildlife and robbed the taxpayer of billions of shillings. The story is extensively covered on pages 4 and 5 of the Daily Monitor. It's a big talking point in Uganda this whole week. Elsewhere, anti-homosexuality law case takes shape. A number of lawyers there before courts. Other highlights on the front page of the Daily Monitor, Fally Ipupa serenades Kampala with epic do. Kwingineko, 2 men in hospital after fighting over mother of 10. Wow.
Okay.
Interesting. Okay.
Well,
these are the big stories.
From gorillas to not true straight stories of homosexuality and okay.
Wow.
It's interesting.
Yes.
Is Tanzania also that interesting today?
Let's see what's headlining on Tanzania this morning. Katika gazeti la Mwananchi, maumivu ya moto, chanzo mazingira ya kuzuka kwa moto Kariakoo bado utata, eneo lililoteka mnadani lina mgogoro wa umiliki, lalado kuuzwa mali za wizi. Kalamila wavaa wafanyabiashara akiagiza polisi kuchunguza, wataalamu wa majengo waonya Kariakoo si eneo salama majanga yanapotokea. It's a sad story there. Reminds me of what we see in Gikomba almost every other time. And mbali na hayo, katika gazeti la Mwananchi kwa Tanzania hii leo, matumaini makali ya mgao yakipungua, na vile vile kuna taarifa hapa inasema ifahamu Boeing 737-9 Max ya ATCL inayotua nchini leo kuongeza ufanisi. Na vile vile katika gazeti la Mwananchi, uteuzi wa Matinyi ulivyoibua wadau wa habari. Haya basi, hayo hizo ndizo taarifa ziko katika gazeti la Mwananchi asubuhi ya leo.
All right, and still on Tanzania, that particular story, take a look at it, Fred, yesterday, the whole Kariakoo. And our director is asking, koni Kariakoo ni ngapi hii dunia? Well, there's another one. You probably know a Kariakoo in Kenya, but there's another in Tanzania. And the citizen is asking why Kariakoo is telling you why Kariakoo is a ticking time bomb. So Kariakoo, Tanzania's largest and business shopping district, is now a veritable concrete jungle, courtesy of rapid and sometimes half-facade development in the last 3 decades, making the area a hotbed of destructive fires. And that is on page 2. They have that photo there, together with a ticking time, fire literally there. Other stories making it to the Citizen, what editors expect of new chief government spokesperson, and $500 million to empower youth in fisheries, livestock keeping. More that is on page 5. Real quick, other stories. Minister explains Tanzania's plane shopping spree. That is on the top strip there on page 3. And just aside it, much as sports, Yanga Simba made clash in Champions League. Okay. On page 20. Oh yes, I'm seeing Yanga and Simba, and it reminds me that the whole game over the weekend, Shabana FC, and it was Shabana FC versus FC Leopards Ingwe. Yes, it was the whole turnout there was just quite interesting.
It's interesting now. Even Moranga Seals attracts quite some good viewership.
Oh yes.
Tusonge maneno mengine.
Tuingie katika masuala ya caricature.
Masuala ya caricature. Very interesting cartoons. I'm actually impressed by the cartoons on both the Daily Nation and the Kenya Kwanza. On the Standard. The one on the Standard is about Kenya Kwanza. They call it KK Circus. KK Circus. And this, we start off with the Standard. This one, Bagado. A lot of things happening within the Kenya Kwanza administration. Foreign policy, in the economics, transport, infighting between CSs and PSs. And there's that gentleman with the turban there saying, come on, give me a break. This is work in progress.
Oh, man.
Yes, it is work in progress. Let's see what happens. Interesting there, cartoon, on the Standard.
The economics there.
Gado really decided to confuse. I'm taking a look at, there's a goat there with initials MK, and just behind it there's a face. So I'm curious who's MK. It's just quite interesting.
And the one pointing at that goat,
yes,
just in the tiger costume. You know we have tigers in Kenya.
Well,
this is a good one. Do you think in Kisii and then?
Sorry?
Do you think in Kisii?
The whole confusion, I think this paints a picture of the whole confusion in the administration.
Even
Yes,
with the
work in
whole foreign
progress.
policy, the fact that he even had to capture it there.
Yes.
My God, there's just a lot happening.
Well, interesting caricature.
Yeah.
The economics. Okay. And the
On the
cartoon,
Daily Nation.
it goes with the same big story that Taifa Leo had this morning, saying Ruto, Kanisa la Mhepa Ruto. And they have the caricature of a gentleman wearing the robe of the man in God. Don't criticize us. Don't criticize. Pray for us.
Oh, yes. Don't criticize, pray for us. Church leaders have come out to criticize the government, but in retaliation to that, they say, no, we do not need your criticism. We only need your prayers. Interesting.
Very
We have a
interesting
stand-up?
cartoons today.
No, we don't have it.
Yes.
Fortunately, we don't have it. So, yes, that's what's headlining in the dailies today. Do we have the cartoon on the Business Daily? Oh, yes. Every day I wake up and I begin the 16-hour process of getting ready for bed again. Interesting cartoon on the Business Daily today. Now, remember our question today, we are asking about gender-based violence, and this is tied to the conversation we'll be having later on the show. Do stand by for that. This morning we're asking, what do you think society can do to better address and support male victims of gender-based violence? Continue interacting with us on our social media pages, TV47 News on X, TV47 Kenya on Facebook. After the break, that big conversation, green manufacturing, engineer Isaac Ndereva, Innocent Oserio, the manager Center for Green Growth and Climate Change from the Kenya Association of Manufacturers, and James Odongo, Chief Administrative Officer, KEPRO. We'll be having this discussion right after this break. You're watching Morning Cafe. Welcome back. You're watching Morning Cafe on TV47 with me, Fred Indimuli. Today we steer away from politics for a bit and discuss something else. Green manufacturing. What exactly is it? What does it mean for us? Today we speak to the experts, and we are very privileged to have in studio, beginning on my immediate right, Engineer Isaac Ndereva is the Executive Director, Electricity Consumers Society of Kenya, ELCOS. Karibu sana, Engineer.
Thank you.
Next to Bwana Ndereva, we have Innocent Onserio, Manager, Center for Green Growth and Climate Change at the Kenya Association of Manufacturers. Good to have you in studio, Innocent. And last but definitely not least, James Odongo, Chief Administrative Officer at the KEPRO, which is the Kenya Extended Producers Responsibility Organization, and we'll get to know more about what Extended Producer Responsibility means. Gentlemen, it's interesting when you have such discussions. A few weeks back, we were talking about when we had the Africa Climate Summit, and we realized that quite a huge part of our population does not really identify with these conversations. And so we'll start from scratch and probably ask Innocent from the Kenya Association of Manufacturers to just give us a basic understanding of what green manufacturing is. What is this concept, and what does it mean for our situation in Kenya?
Thank you, Fred. So, of course, as you said, just like climate change and climate discussions, confusion can exist. Mm-hmm. And I think there are concepts of sustainable manufacturing. We also have the concept of green manufacturing. But for today, we look most specifically looking at the green manufacturing aspect. So green manufacturing is, we are looking at where a manufacturer is producing their goods, or including even the services, but you're looking at the environmental aspects, you're looking at the economic aspects, and you're also looking at the people. Mm-hmm. So that when you bring all these three items together, and they are well aligned, is when you talk about green manufacturing. So you're talking about efficiency in production, and even as we do the transition to green manufacturing, we are moving from linear manufacturing, where you take raw materials, produce a product, and then dispose. But under the green manufacturing discussions, you're looking at where you take the product, use it, and then you're able to recycle it. So it is near zero waste, really, mm-hmm. Kind of setup. That could be the simple definition of green manufacturing. So you're looking at water, you're looking at energy, you're looking at the materials that you use for production.
Okay. And I think that's where now KEPRO comes in. I'm looking at the Sustainable Waste Management Act, Article 13, where it states that every producer shall bear extended producer responsibility obligations to reduce pollution and environmental impacts of the products they introduce into the Kenyan market and waste arising therefrom. So what exactly is this extended producer responsibility?
So thank you, Fred, of course, really giving us this opportunity just to break down some of these concepts that would ordinarily not relate with the common mwananchi. And so the conversation on EPR, just also give a back history to what, how we got ourselves to the concept of EPR in Kenya, is that back in 2016, there was a conversation on banning of single-use plastic carrier bags, and that was actually effected in 2017. And so following that decision by the National Environmental Management Authority, there are other similar proposals to ban other stubborn or other pollutants as far as consumer goods are concerned. So the solution, and this was a conversation from private sector and other actors from across the divide, was that the solution is not in banning of products. The solution is actually managing what would be necessary in terms of ensuring that you're balancing the economy and the environment. So between 2017 and 2019, there was a conversation between the government, private sector entities, donors, as well as other key international players, that how best can Kenya institute measures to manage wastes from getting into the environment, and of course managing the environmental impacts resulting from that. Mm-hmm. So through a consensus, there was an agreement in what we are calling the Kenya Plastic Action Plan, action plan that was agreed upon in 2019, ratified, and that paved way for the implementation of EPR ecosystem in the country. and of course embedment of the same into the Act, or rather Kenya's regulatory framework.
Okay.
So in 2022, we had the Sustainable Waste Management Act, and as you've rightly put it, the Section 13 of the Act introduces mandatory EPR obligation to producers in the country. So in a nutshell, the extended producer responsibility is a policy approach that seeks to, just from the word itself, extend the responsibility of the producer, of the manufacturer throughout the life cycle of the product.
Beyond the manufacturing.
Beyond the manufacturing and introduction of the same into the market. So in this case, the idea is if James is producing a mug, I need to follow up to the extent that Fred has purchased this mug from my shop and gone with it home. So the law now requires that the producer needs to find out where Fred will be disposing the cap after consumption of the product that they have purchased.
Okay.
Yes, yes.
Doesn't that therefore excuse the consumer from any role in this, if at all everything is left to the manufacturer, that you have to take care of this product up to the end, then where does the consumer come in?
Okay, so the Act itself is quite broad in terms of the responsibilities it bestows upon the different actors. And interestingly, the consumer plays a very critical role because there is a conversation on segregation of waste at source. So the conversation, and just as I was mentioning, we are trying to move from a linear economy towards what you're calling the circular economy. And that can only be achieved through realization of a recycling economy as the intermediary. But you can only achieve this if you are segregating your waste at source. So as surprising as it may sound, our recyclers in the country have the challenge of accessing quality waste and the quantity in terms of volumes, because we don't have practices that encourage sustainable disposal of waste. Fred will have his dry waste combined with food waste in one bin.
Supu, nyama, chupa,
exactly. And so that makes it quite difficult to introduce it into the recycling value chain. And so that is why the law is very prescriptive and indicating that it's now going to be mandatory for you at the household level to segregate your waste into at the very bare minimum, dry waste, organic waste, and hazardous waste. Okay. And of course that extends also to the waste service providers to ensure that you are transporting waste that is not mixed.
Okay.
So the law is prescribing quite hefty penalties both to the consumer as well as to the waste service providers.
And we'll come back to that conversation, but I want to bring in Engineer Isaac Ndereba. As Executive Director, Electricity Consumer Society, where do you fit in this conversation about green manufacturing?
Thank you, Fred, because I think it can be confusing when people see me here and they're wondering what is engineer doing here with manufacturing. First of all, let me mention that I have been in manufacturing for about 13 years before I left. And so I'm well conversant with what we are talking about. I've been involved in the programs by Kenya Association of Manufacturers in the efficiency journey, of which we are also licensed to be auditors by EPRA. So we have been working with them very closely. That's why the gentleman you find here on Innocent is also a person we are close with, and we work together. But besides that, I'm here to represent the people who are doing manufacturing using electricity.
Okay.
Now, and it is also difficult for you to mention that you can talk about manufacturing electricity and not engage in politics. That is actually where we have a problem. Because, first of all the electricity consumers or users who are around 9 million in the country, just about less than 2% are the ones who are doing manufacturing. And, but they also contribute to quite a bit of the income to Kenya Power. So we don't need to ignore them. So the predicament they are facing after the increment of power cost in April of this year is also something that needs to be talked about. But in this discussion, you may find that we may have to hide, like we are supposed to use electricity efficiently so that it can be profitable to your business. But see, even as you do that, the government has increased the cost.
Yes.
And not even, let me not say the government, because it's a group of many people. Because Warma is there, EPRA is there. EPRA increased their cost from 0.03 to 0.08 from July, which is more than, I think it's 167% increase. So much as we are talking about using the energy efficiently, is it the government we are benefiting, or is it Kenya Power, or is it ourselves? But I get when we talk about the other products, like if it is the inputs, and the processes, there is a way where you can actually save. But when it comes to power, whatever you have saved is being taken away by the government. So I don't think that they are supporting this initiative of green manufacturing.
Okay.
But all the same, I think we are going to dive into those issues.
It is an ideal because looking at it, this is what we could aspire to. But at what cost? We are looking at, and I think the engineer mentioned, we are looking at an environment that's already deemed unfavorable to manufacturers given the tax regime, given the cost of electricity. Now, this extended producer responsibility also comes at a cost. Are we not burdening the manufacturer more? Are we not making this market unattractive for potential investors in the manufacturing industry by insisting that we go this green manufacturing way?
Maybe my view on this from the manufacturer side. For instance, as CAM, we working towards what we say 20 by 30, where we want manufacturing to contribute at least 20% to the GDP by the year 2030. We are now below 10%. You see, that's an ambitious goal. And we know for sure one of the main drivers for this is maybe to do a little more of exports. So when you're doing what we're referring to as the export-led growth, it means you have to ensure your products are competitive globally. So for you to be able to compete, say, in the European markets or Asian markets or any other market for that matter, it could be even the regional markets across the border, you have to look outside of what we are doing here. So one of the things, if, for example, we're looking at energy cost, of course, we know the costs are high as we speak. But what can manufacturers then do to already reduce this cost within their factory? And that's where the energy efficiency comes in, what Engineer Isaac has mentioned, that we do audits, energy audits. So energy audits are supposed to assist facilities to identify areas of wastage. And when they are able to implement, in this case we are saying fully implement the report or the recommendations by the consultant, they are able to make savings tenfold. So if you invest, say, $1 million shillings, you can be able to save up to 10 million. Just within the actions of the investors, the engineers on site, you are able to make that kind of saving. So that after that is done, then we are able to also engage government, and we always engage in government at all levels to also reduce these costs. And for example, from the KEM side, we have the Center for Energy Efficiency and Conservation, which I also manage. So the center actually gets direct government support to conduct energy audits to support some of the facilities in this green transition on green manufacturing. So of course a lot needs to be done, a lot in terms of investment, green investment. So this investment, we are looking at the public-private action. How do we get private sector to see green manufacturing as a new area of putting their money beyond the other?
Hold that thought, because I think we're going a bit too fast. Yeah. Let's go back to extended producer responsibility. And our understanding is that if at all I'm manufacturing or I'm baking bread, and now I have to cater for an extra cost of ensuring that probably the packaging for this loaf of bread is disposed after consumption of the bread,
Yes.
There's a cost implication to it. Now, manufacturers do this for profit. It's a business. The bottom line is what really matters. So the risk, therefore, is that any additional cost will just go straight to the consumer. Is that what is happening? Or do the manufacturers take up some of this cost?
Okay. So maybe just even before I get into the conversation on cost, I think we also need to be very careful not to be try and be politically correct in the narrative of trying to argue that we are making the business ecosystem difficult for the manufacturing sector. Looking back statistically, yes, Africa might be contributing a bit lesser fractions in terms of global emissions. You look at less than 4%. But from a continental perspective, the manufacturing sector is contributing between 30 to 40% in terms of GHG emissions. That is according to a McKinsey report. If you come locally, we are looking at, from a tonnage perspective in terms of the post-consumer wastes disposed of onto our environment. Nairobi, for instance, is generating up to 3,000 metric tons of waste per day. Now, out of these 3,000 metric tons, only 70% is collected. So the other 30% is going into the environment. For the 70%, less than 30% is reintroduced into the production chain. So in terms of the environmental effect, or other implications of these actions, that is really out of this world in terms of what the implications are as far as pollution, environmental degradation is concerned. Now, back to the conversation on cost. So you've used quite an interesting example, the loaf of bread. So interestingly, after the ban of the single-use plastic bags in 2017, the next will be victims are the bread manufacturers and the larger bread manufacturing sector. And the idea was that now theirs was an entry point in terms of you have to figure out an alternative in terms of how you'll package your bread or manage your single-use plastic bags. The alternative was cheaper, or rather the EPR was cheaper compared to alternatives in terms of packaging for bread.
Mm-hmm. So the cost you pay for EPR is much cheaper than getting an alternative packaging for
Yes.
Okay.
And just to further break it down, KEPRO has been in this business of implementation of EPR since 2021, of course in a voluntary ecosystem, up until the NEMA notice, introducing it as a mandatory requirement. And between 2021 to date, we've done our own assessment, and the incremental cost in terms of bread for EPR compliance is almost 0.1%. So if you're looking at bread at 60 shillings, the net effect, even if the cost is to be transferred to the consumer, that bread would be retailing at 60.05 shillings.
Okay. But currently, who bears at 0.5? Is it the manufacturer? Is it the consumer?
In our initial assessment, majority of it is taken by the manufacturer. But of course, we understand, based on the increasing changing dynamic as far as business landscape in the country is concerned, there are fears that the cost will be transferred to the end consumer. Mm-hmm. But I feel 0.1%, and that is our assertion as the Kenya Extended Producer Responsibility Organization, is a negligible cost compared to leaving that waste to get into the environment. The net effect from an environmental impact compared to the 0.1%, it's arguably quite affordable.
And from a consumer's perspective, even with you as a manufacturer, do we really identify with this need to go green as Kenyans? Because if I'm doing it for profit, my understanding is that as a continent, we are not, we are way below in terms of emissions. The bigger emitters are elsewhere. Mm-hmm. Why should we really constrain ourselves and look as if we're punishing our consumers and manufacturers at a greater cost?
I think you're right. One, I think the consumers needs to be, there is no easier way to motivate a manufacturer other than a cost reduction. And when I zero into the cost of power, because I think that takes about more than 30% in most of the manufacturers' budgets. The production budget goes to 30% is electricity. Now, in Kenya, for example, to bring you close to how we are faring badly as a country, we have less than 1% of people doing manufacturing. Mm-hmm. In the whole 9 million consumers, less than 1% is manufacturing. Now, the contribution to Kenya Power, they give us 30%. That less than 1% give us.
They are the biggest consumers.
They are the biggest contributors to Kenya Power. The rest are just domestic, who are complaining. And you see, once you use power in a country as consumption, not as a production component, that becomes very complicated. Now, if you look at South Africa, the contribution to manufacturing is actually 56%. Of course, they are suffering their own way. We cannot now benchmark with South Africa as a country. I think we are doing better. But there is a point they were at, which was actually at a better position than us. But now, let me say that if I have heard Innocent Onserio saying that they are using other regulations like using energy audits and all that. But you can consider if I have used 10 shillings to produce a bread in terms of electricity, I bring the cost to a half, then you double the cost. I am back to 10 shillings. So you see what motivation is there for us to go green in such a way when it comes to power. I mean, the only way I have seen people trying to go green, the manufacturers, is only by installation of solar. That is the best way I can say they are trying to go green. Because that way they are able to control their cost without involving the government. But remember also there are some people who have come who are supplying solar who are also not very genuine to the consumers. And they are not giving you the cost that would be profitable. Sometimes they don't tell you that this thing will not be very useful after 15 years, and that is the time they are telling you you're going to give you to be for you to own it. It's going to take about 15 years. But by that time, it's like having a lady who you are going to be told you are going to marry at 60 years.
She'll be too old.
She will be too old, and that is how these people of solar are saying that we are going to be giving you this solar for 15 years. It will be yours. At that time, the degradation rate of that solar is so huge such that it will be useless. And you see, so that is the only way out to go green as far as manufacturers are concerned is to install solar, but then they buy out and install completely. We have many people who have done that, and I think they are enjoying. Much as it is also a bit expensive and also complicated if it is grid tied, because you have also these solars in manufacturing where if power goes off, from the grid, also solar goes off.
It goes off as well.
You see, so you don't get, how useful was it? It cannot only be used as backup in domestic.
Okay.
So I mean, going green as far as electricity consumers are concerned would be installing solar to knock off that cost. Any other effort that this program is handling, that every time you save something, the cost is doubled, so you are back to the same digging deeper in your pocket.
Okay.
It won't make sense.
And on that note, we take a break. Definitely issues on how Kenya is approaching this whole green manufacturing. Of course, questions being asked on this panel as well. Let's take a break. When we come back, we'll be looking at a lot more to do with green manufacturing and the extended producer responsibility concept, as well as the knowledge gap in as far as these concepts are concerned. You're watching Morning Cafe. Welcome back. You're watching Morning Cafe on TV47 with me, Fred Ndimuli. We're having this conversation about green manufacturing with engineer Isaac Ndereva, Executive Director, Electricity Consumers Society of Kenya, ELCOS, a manufacturer in his own right. Innocent Onserio, Manager, Center for Green Growth and Climate Change, Kenya Association of Manufacturers, and James Odongo, Chief Administrative Officer, Kenya Extended Producer Responsibility Organization. And gentlemen, I want us to move now to Kenya's approach to green manufacturing and how it serves our peculiar needs in Kenya, because this to be honest, many Kenyans feel that any conversation to do with even climate change is such a foreign discussion. So many ideas of what to do come from outside our borders. Is this what we're doing with the green manufacturing or even extended producer responsibility, that we've gotten ideas from elsewhere and we're trying to implement them in Kenya? And if at all, how well are they working? For example, Innocent, do we have examples of Kenyan manufacturers who successfully adopted these concepts and we can say they've managed to strike a balance and their bottom line has not suffered?
Thank you, Fred. I think from our learnings from our interactions with the manufacturers, even as we support them towards this goal of green manufacturing, is that when you look at some of the companies which operate internationally, and we have quite a number of multinationals here, some of them are actually leading the pack in terms of when compared with their peers. It could be in Asia, South America, and even sometime in Europe. The reason why people feel this is a foreign idea, foreign agenda, is because for a moment we forget that we now moving towards a globalization, a global economy, where you are not just going to just focus solely on what is immediate to the Kenyan needs, as it were. So from the manufacturer's perspective, we cannot avoid this discussion of green manufacturing because in a few years, or maybe next year, you will find that there are many regulations which are coming up, regional regulations, international regulations, which are going to compel most of the manufacturers to actually go green, whether they like it or not. So that's why we are supporting them to prepare them to start manufacturing sustainably. And the reason is most of the money for manufacturers is actually in exports. As I mentioned, the export-led growth. And there's also the agriculture bit, which is agriculture is the backbone of this country. So even as we discuss green manufacturing, we also have to look at how do we have agriculture being prepared for industry, so that the job opportunities will grow to be much bigger. The forward linkages, the backward linkages, so that we're looking at the whole value chain from farm to actually to either to the shelf. And the reason why green manufacturing is important for Kenyan manufacturers, whether big or small, is because, for one, while initially the costs appear to be high, after a year or two, it is actually much lower to manufacture sustainably, because your products can get a much better price at the international market, whether it's agricultural products, whether it's textile. In fact, some international buyers will require you to disclose all the information about your water use, chemical use, even the material efficiency in terms of your production. So the way we see it, the more manufacturers are prepared for this discussion, and not just prepared for just understanding green manufacturing, but actually implementing it in their facility, it will be very hard. And from our side, we actually support them in various ways. We do assessments for them. We support them with technology and also financing if they need financing, because sometimes the main impediment to actually implementing the green manufacturing initiatives is financing. So if there's that kind of linkage, and that's why we're working with a number of partners, financial institutions, and even sometimes with banks, to assist the manufacturers to take that burden, so that as they focus on the manufacturing process, someone else is taking the burden of financing, and that is working well so far. And the other bit which we have not discussed here and which is very important is publicity and awareness.
Yes.
People need to be aware of this concept of publicity. It needs to be broken down nicely on what it means, what the implications are, so that we move, no one is left behind in terms of manufacturing.
Yes, and it's interesting that you mentioned the issue of knowledge gap. You remember during that week, the Africa Climate Summit week, and it was very interesting to see the kind of conversation, even by politicians, on their understanding on the concept. And how much of a problem is it, James? Even communicating green manufacturing, because you said even the consumer is a key component of this cyclic concept.
Yes.
Yet there exists a huge knowledge gap. We are yet to mainstream issues about sustainability, environmental issues, even in our curriculum. What, for example, is KEPRO doing towards bridging that gap?
Okay. So that's understandable. First, we need to understand that for Africa, for the longest time, the narrative on climate change and mitigation was a foreign concept. I think up until recently, and through the Africa Climate Summit, is when Africa came out broadly and actually indicating that it is now going to take an active, or rather center stage in terms of the conversation on green transition, climate change adaptation, and the likes. When you come to the local context, while there's the aspect of knowledge gap and lack of awareness, there's also an increasingly emerging group of consumers who are now very woke in terms of their consumption trends and the likes. So that in itself is an indication that we are moving towards that a situation or space where people are more aware of their consumption trends and what needs to be done as far as sustainability is concerned. Within the conversation on sustainable waste management practices, based on our own experiences, and it's as frustrating as it can get, is that yes, even as we share the awareness, there's also the aspect of cultural upbringing. So right from childhood, you've always been brought up knowing that there's only one bin. And then as an adult, 40 years later, you're told now you need to use or have 3 bins in your household. So that in itself is a challenge in the sense that you're coming from an upbringing that did not appreciate some of these practices, and it is being introduced at a later stage. So to try and address this, of course, KEPRO and in partnership with other organizations, we are trying to first make a case for waste as a business. And for us, the clarion call has always been converting trash to cash. So trash to cash. So for us to be able to demystify the narrative on waste, we are incentivizing. And of course, even the law requires that county governments will also need to incentivize segregation of waste and disposal of waste appropriately. So in addition to incentivizing, or rather demystifying the narrative on waste, we're also trying to look at it as an opportunity for employment creation. So through that, you're not only creating employment, but you're also making a case for people to actually see wastes as trash. So you are encouraging behavior change indirectly.
When you talk about employment opportunities,
Yes,
because it's always a very interesting area to go in,
Mm-hmm.
are you just talking about employment in terms of waste recycling,
Yes.
or is there any other form of employment, probably at higher levels of research, innovation, that come with green manufacturing as well?
Yes,
because if we just say jobs will be for those collecting waste and recycling, it has a very different kind of connotation.
Yes. So 2 things. In addition to the informal integration in terms of now recognizing the low cadre jobs in the waste ecosystem, we're also creating new opportunities for investment. You're looking at research and development. So for instance, we are having the non-recyclable items, the laminates and the composites that would ordinarily come from consumer consumption. So like recently, I think there was a story featuring somebody who's trying to manufacture or rather produce diesel from certain material fractions of plastic, just to be able to address the challenges that are coming with those fractions that can't be introduced into the recycling ecosystem. So for instance, that is one job. And despite the fact that he's still at the research stage, he's employed over 10 people just to be able to support that conversation. But beyond that, we are looking at other opportunities coming in the form of technology, improvement of existing technology, and of course, innovation with respect to creating new platforms for, we are looking at now people looking at blockchain technology to see how we can be able to track the material fractions right from production all the way to the dump sites and of course at household level as far as disposal is concerned. Okay. So I think opportunities in terms of what we are creating from an EPR point of view and from the whole conversation on sustainability are unlimited, both locally and of course internationally if you look at the different researches that have been done.
Okay.
Yes.
Engineer, listening to you, you definitely have queries and questions about this whole system.
Yeah.
The intention is genuine and pure, and the results will benefit everyone. But do you feel that from a manufacturer's perspective that some of these concepts are being forced down your throat a bit faster than they should, that probably should be taken a bit slower?
Yeah, I think you read my mind, but I will give a few examples. First of all, I think the people or the bodies that represent consumers or manufacturers should be they should at least up their game. Because not all manufacturers are members of Kenya Association of Manufacturers. Mm-hmm. That is number one. Why are they not finding it motivation for them to go there? But one is you have to find need to educate these people or create awareness. For example, if you are told that there is a problem with climate change, most people think that I'm in Nairobi, it is 26 degrees. Mm-hmm. I go to Mombasa, it's 36. What is a big deal? They don't understand the effects of climate changes, actually, that there can be rise in ocean levels, there can be loss of species. For example, I was asking a group I was training a week before this one. I asked them, at what point is the gender of a hen or a cock determined? And they were not very sure. Also, it could be challenging for you to know that if you have an egg, is it determined during laying that it is a male or a female?
I've never thought about it.
You've never thought about it. You see, so it is determined by the temperature at which it is incubated.
Oh, okay.
That's why you see some of the species, like turtles, they are normally affected because at some point you find the rise in temperature levels around the ocean or the beaches. We'll see all the eggs of turtles hatch into males. Mm-hmm. That is how species are lost. We have also lost species in our women. We have some women who cannot cook githeri and such. That is not the kind of the loss we are talking about. But coming close, so that awareness is really necessary by these bodies. For example, today on page 16 of Nation, I found like they are looking for the Director General of Competition Authority of Kenya. I'm not even sure whether you can be able to know who was there previously. Mm-hmm. Now, the main role is the authority board is seeking to recruit or something, but they are saying their main job is to promote and safeguard competition and protect consumers. Now, how many people know that body? Mm-hmm. And so we come closer. How many people know Kipro? How many people know CAM as manufacturers? I have an example of two factories, and I will name them because they are public. Mm-hmm. When I was trying to consult for Chemelil sugar, one thing, and I don't know whether CAM knows that, they were using 19 kgs of cane to make 1 kg of sugar. Mm-hmm. 19 kgs. So the yabagas at the end of the day can actually be sold and produce more juice, mm-hmm, just because of lack of maintenance. That is under the Ministry of Agriculture. So we tried to push for that, and they were saying we are still yet to get to know the Minister for Agriculture or the Cabinet Secretary. This has to be allowed a budget of like maybe even 700 million. If you go to Butali Sugar, for example, they are using 9.8 kgs of cane to make 1 kg of sugar. You can see the efficiency is it's double. Now, if you ask CAM, have you reached out to this person to match this and what they are supposed to do? And is CAM using its network with the government to push the Ministry of Agriculture to assist this particular factory? And as a result, you will see the people around Chemelil Sugar are finding like Chemelil is buying their cane at a cheaper price, mm-hmm, than West Kenya Sugar and Butali Sugar, which is actually many kilometers away. And same as Kibos. Mm-hmm. So you find that a government-supported factory has not even benefited from this drive, mm-hmm, that is being driven by the government. So then, at what point, if you cannot bail out your own, how do you expect to bail out others? Okay. So that is the drive I'm saying. Let us start with the government institutions themselves.
Okay. Yeah. Are we doing things in reverse then? That we start with legislation. Now it is mandatory that EPR is taken into account. I was looking at that Sustainability Act that we quoted earlier. Isn't that, because when it comes to enforcement, enforcement in Kenya has taken this punitive approach, yeah, that we punish you for doing something. If at all I do not even know, or I don't understand exactly what I'm supposed to do, punishing me would not really be a solution, don't you think?
Fred, actually, we are not doing things in reverse, and I'll give very specific examples. If you look at what Engineer Reva is mentioning around actually, what he was mentioning is mainly around material use efficiency, where one factory is leaving the bagasse with a lot of sugar content, while another one is doing much better. And maybe even the one which is doing much better, when you benchmark it with maybe another more efficient factory in maybe South Sudan or the Sudan, it could be maybe even 8 or 7. If you look at, say, for example, energy efficiency, which CAM has been working with the Kenyan government for quite a while through the Center for Energy Efficiency and Conservation, we actually started doing energy audits in way back in 2006, even earlier, I think 2004. So this was way before regulations. Regulations came in 2012. So within which time, there was a sufficient number of manufacturers who already had conducted energy audits, they had already implemented, and they were reaping the savings. So in this case, the regulations came after the actual actions had taken place. In fact, a lot of learnings and a lot of tweaking of the regulations were hinged on what the experience had been for those years before the actual regulations came in. Mm-hmm. The other one we can look at is as a follow-up to the Climate Change Act of 2016, there's a lot of mention of carbon footprint from the industry perspective and of course for all the sectors. As CAM, we're already conducting the carbon footprint assessments for industries. There's a lot of discussion around carbon markets and how carbon credits, how you can have it as an additional revenue stream. So you see there's no law as we speak that's compelling any manufacturer to conduct a carbon footprint assessment and actually implement it. But we're already assisting manufacturers to already know their carbon footprint, and one of them has already attained net zero. Net zero means they are not contributing negatively to the environment. Mm-hmm. So there's that component of self-regulation, and in fact as CAM, that's what we are pushing. That as a sector, as a subsector, as a manufacturer, are you able then to look within yourself and see what can you do within the resources you have, and of course with the support from, it could be government or support from other people who are interested, it could be investors, to already implement. And we know for sure it's only a matter of time before we actually have regulations compelling manufacturers to do their carbon footprint assessments, by which time most of manufacturers could already be aware of what they need to do, they could have already been implemented. So they will be way ahead of regulation, and that's how we want it.
Do we, for example, have some proactive incentives for manufacturers to engage in green manufacturing? Because already we're talking about a proposal by government to increase even VAT to 18%, which is a problem in itself. And manufacturers may feel, why do I need to bother with this? Is there any policy incentive from government directly to manufacturers?
I think one of the incentives is when you look at, say, I will speak on the energy side of things. One of those incentives is around, actual direct support from government, especially for facilities. It could be SMEs who may want support in trying to find out how the facilities are operating, whether it's efficient or not. So we as CAM, we are supported by government financially and sometimes technically, because we engage quite a lot to look at the baseline, and from that we are able to map out the opportunities that exist. And as I mentioned earlier, if a facility conducts an energy audit and is able to implement 100% of the recommendations, they can be able to, for every 1 shilling that you put in, you can get 10 shillings out of that whole exercise. That's a huge, I think is one of those very attractive, investments. Mm-hmm. But then you ask yourself, why are people not investing fast enough in this area? Sometimes it's that bit of publicity and awareness, which we also driving, so that they also, publicity and awareness about, I've done my audit, where do I get the money? That's one of the ways of pointing them in the right direction. Or even certification
that this has happened.
Fred, it's interesting. Yeah, it's interesting. He has said, and I think we need to capture this slowly by slowly. One, Kenya Association of Manufacturers is supposed to fight for the advocacy of the manufacturers, both in the costs that is levied to them. Yeah. For example, electricity. Now, the government wants to increase the cost of electricity from this to this because it has shares in Kenya Power. It also needs to increase the EPRA levy from 0.03 to 0.08. And there is a regulation to increase it more. Now, it wants to increase the water, it's called WARMA in our bills, from 0.02 to 2 shillings per kilowatt hour. CAM is supposed to come and say no, but it is being supported by the government, as he has said. At what point where is the line where it says you better not support us, but this one you will not levy to our manufacturers? You can see there is a complication there.
Yes.
And that is why I find that manufacturers are not well represented.
Okay.
If they are being represented at the Kenya Association of Manufacturers, then they should understand that Kenya Association of Manufacturers is in bed with the government.
Okay, probably innocent as you defend Kenya Association of Manufacturers, because you have a right to, because there's an issue of giving with one hand, taking with the other. But the incentives should appear better for the manufacturer to engage in this, even with the prevailing tax regime.
I think there's a misconception here that, and there's a heavy statement that Ndereva is putting forward, that we're in bed with government. I think the thing we need to look at, can we work without a government? And that's why for us we're pushing for public-private partnerships to move forward. Because there are two options we have. We can treat the government as an enemy, like for every small increase you have to have placards saying this is unwarranted, this is unnecessary, we don't want it. Or you can try to sit at a table and discuss all this. For example, if the levy for say, under the structure for the electricity tariffs, if a levy is being increased, you have to sit and discuss and agree. I think that's the only way we get to move forward. Otherwise, if it is, we create an atmosphere of treating government as our enemy, then the economy collapses. So what we are doing as CAM is first look at what is truly in our full control.
Okay.
Let's address that first. And then the other things which have a lot of stakeholders, where you have government, you have the manufacturers, you have the international community also interested. For example, when you talk about electricity prices, there's the component of the fuel. There's forex adjustment, and we already know we cannot be blind to what is happening in the global economy. The dollar is an all-time high. The fuel costs has gone high. Of course, it is slowly reducing, and all that contributes to the actual costs the manufacturer is going to pay. So for us, what we are saying, it could be worse. It could be worse if we don't take action, waiting upon government to, just change either through a regulation or those monthly reviews to change the tariff downwards. It could be worse if that does not happen, if you are not already trying to push for cost reduction on site.
Okay.
So that if you get government to agree with you, it is a double blessing for you, because you've already reduced your costs as low as they can be. If you get a 10% decrease in tariff from the interventions of CAM and the likes of ELCOS, then you are able to...
Interesting discussion. But James, I want to take you back to the issue of the knowledge gap.
Yes.
And the fact that this is something that is not a stopgap measure. It's something that's going to be there with us moving forward. And you talked about now shifting from the single bin to several bins.
Yes, yes.
And these are things that probably should be mainstreamed in our curriculum, probably from CBC level. I don't know how much of that is happening, and if at all your organization is involved in any way in generating curriculum in as far as this issue is concerned.
Okay. Thank you very much. And maybe just to also add a bit of sentiments to what they were discussing earlier, is that we're increasingly seeing a change in the narrative from what was initially the approach by government in terms of implementation of some of these conversations. So for instance, from a legislative point of view, the conversation on EPR was actually a private sector-led initiative in response to what the government had done as far as using a yardstick to ban the use of single-use plastic carrier bags. And so even from the EPR point of view, you are seeing NEMA leaving it open and indicating that we are asking that we are going the assisted compliance way, as opposed to enforcement, where you are fined Kenya shillings 2 million per incident and the likes. So NEMA has granted us as private sector that window, that we are providing you with a window of assisted compliance within the next 1-2 years to be able to ensure that everyone is aware of what is required of them, and this is how you're supposed to actually comply. The next, to your question in terms of what we are doing as far as embedding the principles of sustainability are concerned from the younger stage, both NEMA and the respective producer responsibility organizations such as KPRO, we are working jointly to try and encourage these conversations right from schools. So as a first step, and we need to understand that our capacities were first limited because in the initial stages we were working with the coalition of the willing. But now with more funding and support from the private sector, is that we are now spreading our wings to these other issues, and especially on awareness creation and addressing the issue of knowledge gap. So as a first step, we, as KPRO, we have developed a toolkit targeting the informal waste pickers who are down at the dump site and are not necessarily aware of what the EPR regulations mean for them, how they can benefit from the same, because the Act now says that they have to be recognized, but of course, this can only be done with them being in organized groups. So that is our initial entry point in terms of addressing that particular constituency within the waste ecosystem. And then in terms of awareness creation, we are also very critical and very particular on targeting schools. So as KPRO, I think we've worked with over 10 schools currently, or rather this year alone, just trying to encourage and understandably, because what we are learning is that when your kid comes at home and tells you, Dad, we're actually supposed to segregate our waste. We are seeing some
Instead
sort
of one
change.
bin,
Exactly,
we need to have 4.
Exactly. We are seeing them as our ambassadors of change to the extent that they're actually practically following and ensuring that their parents are doing the segregation. So I'll give you an example. There was a day we had gone for an awareness forum, and it was targeting college students and university students. And after the session, I was driving behind a bus that was transporting the students from the facility. And interestingly, despite the whole segregate your waste, properly dispose your waste, somebody was throwing their litter from the. But when you're in schools, the smaller schools, or rather schools with the younger age groups, you're seeing that the uptake of these practices are good to the extent that our recyclers are always willing and open to engage with us free of charge to be able to go and collect the waste from, because it's properly segregated and it's easier to dispose, and what is recyclable, it's easier to entrench into the recycling ecosystem. Okay. And then moving in terms of, from a future outlook point of view, next year we are now moving into development of an actual curriculum that will be TVET accredited to look at waste management being taught right from schools, in primary schools, as well as, of course, the initial phase will be targeting the high level, so you're looking at certificate and diploma classes, and then in the long run, we're also going to see how we'll have it as part of the main curriculum for the younger age groups. Okay. Yes.
Interesting. And gentlemen, as we come to the end of our discussion, let's start with you, engineer. For example, how would you want KPRO and CAM to, and even the government to approach this whole issue? Because you seem a bit discontented with their approach, not the whole idea or concept, but the approach that the government and these organizations have taken.
I have mentioned here that as consumers and representing manufacturers here, and knowing that we should be on the same boat with CAM to represent manufacturers, it is at that point that we part when actually like we have a court case because of the power cost increase. Mm-hmm. There was public participation that we thought that that was not fair. And the cost of power, the increase in cost of power was not fair. But then CAM had their own sitting with the people who are leading in public participation, and that was EPRA. There is a particular cost called demand charges that is levied per kVA. For a consumer who is in commercial and industrial tariff 1, category 1, it was changed from 800 to 1100, 300 shillings. There is no reason that was given why that required to be increased. They didn't pick that. It is the consumer society that picked it. And so we also went to court because of the same. They have not gone. So, but they have also not come to say, we found, like you raised a very valid point, we are ready to be interested parties in the court case. Mm-hmm. They are also not aware that we have a mention today in the court, and we are not ready to drop the case. Now, we are supposed to go I'm supposed to go to Wisconsin at the end of the month in the US to look for funding so that we can push for those agendas. CAM is being funded by the government, but they can't find it necessary to fund us something little, at least to pay for the court charges, because we are representing their manufacturers. Same as what James is doing, as I say. I'm sure they have funding. But how is this funding translating into benefits to the consumer, other than just pushing the law? Because like now, we have a new Energy Act that came in March of 2019. It has generated a lot of regulations that are still, we have net metering, we have energy management regulations that has not been signed. They were in the process. And then when we got a new CS, again, the Energy Act was taken back, and there are some adjustments being done in the parliament again. What will come out of it? So as a result, that is what we are saying. They should involve the stakeholders that are necessary through actually, let it be awareness forums. I know CAM has been trying to conduct some awareness forums, but it is selective. Because the people who are rich, like for example, now we have the biggest manufacturer in this country called Narendra Raval, who is the owner of Devki Group. The way he has approached us as a society, the way he has suffered in his coastal plant, he has not found it necessary to tell CAM, because CAM, either they don't have capacity or they don't want to assist him or he is not a member. So, I mean, the approach, I have a whole problem with the approach on how. And that is why I'm saying CAM should come to us and tell us we now need to combine forces so that we can approach this whole issue as a group. Okay. But sometimes they are saying we are going to court and then we are being told. But CAM do not have a problem. So manufacturers do not have a problem.
But
the cost of power. It's disjointed. So as a result, we are being seen like we are the bad people. And then at one point they will say, go represent the people who are in domestic. But that is not our intention. We are also pushing for manufacturing in this country so that we can get employment.
Innocent, some good feedback there that you need to respond to as we wrap up this conversation.
Well, as we wrap up, I'll just like to respond to Engineer Ndereba. I think some of the statements may be misleading. One, CAM is, as I said, our approach is partnership. It's not about everything has to end up in a court case. And when you look at the tariff structure, while we may choose to be selective on what component of the tariff structure we want to address, I think an all tariff structure approach could be better, where each of the components is broken down, where there's an increase, it has to be justified where there's an increase. And that's why I'm saying the stakeholder participation, the stakeholder engagement comes in. Otherwise, you may pick one component where you have a 0.01 to 0.04 and dwell on it, for example, while you are missing the bigger picture of what is happening globally. Because we can't bury our heads in the sand and say we want this cost to go down by 50%. Of course, CAM is pushing for reduced costs of production, and of course, one of the main components is electricity. So it is actually misleading that we okay with the increase in costs. In any case, we are the ones who represent most of the serious manufacturers in this country, and it's in our interest to support them to have those costs reduced. All I was saying is that our approach is first to engage with government, to understand why there are those increases. Of course, even for us to engage directly we're also pushing for the reduction in the costs at the policy level, either through the tariff structure, or we're also pushing some of the things like the time of use, where manufacturers can get a reduced tariff if they produce beyond a certain threshold, especially at night. So there are many things we are doing. And in terms of capacity, I don't think there's a BMO, a business member organization in Kenya, that has the capacity that CAM has. And that's the truth. Because we are the ones who are pushing the policy discussions, policy reviews. And for us, we are not just pushing just the discussions. We're also doing the actual actions on the ground. Because I think we need to combine the intentions with the actions. Otherwise, we may end up where we are discussing forever.
Because the concern is that this kind of discontent, when it comes to issues of green manufacturing, if it persists, then it beats the purpose.
And actually, that's why precisely for us, our approach is wholesome, because we look at policy, we look at the actual actions on the ground, we do capacity building, and I think James has already mentioned. We actually train manufacturers on what we are discussing, so they are able to implement. We also even give them linkages, technology and financial linkages. When you put all these things together, any serious manufacturer who is also, and there's also management buy-in, find the transition smooth.
Okay.
But otherwise, if we end up like this, someone's problem, someone will solve it for us, someone will review for example, the tariff charges, you will end up in that same position. The world will have moved on and you will be left behind. Because I think the only way of manufacturing in a few years will be green manufacturing. There will be no other way.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Innocent. Finally, James.
Okay, thank you, Fred. I think this would be also in response to engineer. We need to be careful not to sensationalize this conversation on green manufacturing. And of course, any transition for the better would always have its pain points in terms of the consequences that would be, or rather the cost that would come with it. And the reality is that some of these conversations have been there for the longest time in terms of consultation and collaborative efforts just to try and drive, or rather arrive at a common voice. But let us be real to or rather be alive to the reality that where human beings are, you'll always have diverse opinions. And so you'd get that a majority, say out of 100%, 70% are in support, but the 30% also have a voice that needs to be addressed. So even as we look at the 30%, let us not overshadow or try to override the benefits that the 70% have seen. So when you look at the conversation on electricity, on this whole conversation on green manufacturing, conversation started way back from, I think, 2012. You had the MTP3, you had the Kenya Green Economy Transition and Implementation Plan. So some of these conversations have been there for the longest time. Classical example, the EPR regulations. These are conversations that started way back in 2017, but you'll get somebody who, for purposes of convenience, chose to ignore the conversation right from the beginning in terms of stakeholder engagement, awareness forums and the likes, wakes up and decides, oh, the government introduced a new regulation last year, despite the fact that this conversation has been ongoing for quite some time. So I think, in a nutshell, let us be careful to look at the facts as opposed to trying to be sensational and politically correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you so much, James Odongo, Chief Administrative Officer, Kenya Extended Producer Responsibility Organization. It will get some, it needs some getting used to.
Yes.
Innocent Onserio, Manager, Center for Green Growth and Climate Change, Kenya Association of Manufacturers, and Engineer Isaac Ndereva, Executive Director, Electricity Consumer Society of Kenya, ELCOS Kenya. Thank you so much, gentlemen, helping us understand this concept of green manufacturing and the extended producer responsibility concept as well. Very interesting conversation that every Kenyan, every manufacturer, every person getting involved in business, even agriculture, needs to understand. And this is a discussion that we hope that we'll continue with in the coming days. Thank you, gentlemen, for your very well-considered opinions on this. And as we come to the end of this session, I need to go through this editorial commentary. Now, our attention today has been drawn to the recent debate over political party funding from the national budget to the tune of 1.4 billion Kenya shillings. Many are questioning the importance and necessity of funding political parties in a democracy. While it is understandable that there is growing discontent over how political parties operate in Kenya, it is crucial to recognize the essential role they play as integral components of a functioning democracy. One of the primary criticisms of political parties is that they often operate more like private entities rather than vehicles for public representation. Moreover, the lack of internal democracy within many political parties exacerbates the problem. The appointment of party officials through cronyism and horse trading rather than democratic elections erodes trust in these parties. Now, however, recent news of major parties like UDA and ODM planning grassroots elections is a positive step forward. These upcoming elections offer hope that political parties in Kenya may undergo a transformation towards greater transparency and accountability. The abuse of the political party system to consolidate power and exclude vulnerable groups such as women and the youth from the national discourse is a legitimate concern. In a true democracy, political parties should be instruments that genuinely represent the diverse aspirations of all citizens. When parties are funded by taxpayers' funds, they belong to the people and must act accordingly, serving as inclusive platforms that champion the interests of all Kenyans. Furthermore, it is crucial for Kenyan citizens to recognize their critical civic duty to participate actively in the political process. Political parties are not just vehicles for politicians, but essential tools that enable individuals to engage in the democratic process. By joining and engaging with parties, citizens can influence the direction of their country and help shape policies that reflect their values and needs. After all,